A concrete pillar, sealed since the mid-90s, was cracked open during a city redevelopment project in Ashwood, a quiet, coastal town in northern England. What the crew found inside wasn't just a cavity. It was a burial, an impossible one. Inside the hollow column was a red suitcase wrapped in clear plastic. It had no mold, no water damage, nothing to suggest it had spent even a day in the ground. When police unzipped it, they found the neatly folded clothes of a child, dated receipts from 1994, and a camcorder still holding battery charge. The final frame. A woman speaking directly to the lens, whispering, "They'll find this. But it'll already be too late. Stay with me, it only gets stranger. You won't believe what really happened." The redevelopment site sat in what used to be the downtown shopping district, long shuttered after the economic dip of the early 2000s. No one thought twice about demolishing the old plaza. It had been gutted for years, pigeons nested in broken roof panels, graffiti thick on the walls, glass crunched underfoot with every step. But on the morning of April 23, during the routine removal of a support column from the underground parking deck, workers noticed something odd. The core of the pillar wasn't solid concrete. It had a central cavity lined with rubber insulation. Not structural at all. And inside that cavity was the suitcase. Detective Inspector Grace Mallory, nearing retirement after 30 years in the force, had seen her share of buried remains. But this was different. It wasn't just the pristine condition of the suitcase. It was the timestamp on the video. The footage had been recorded on November 15, 1994, nearly 31 years ago, and yet the battery on the old Panasonic camcorder hadn't drained. In the video, the woman looked to be in her early 40s. Shoulder-length dark hair, wire-framed glasses, and a calm, practiced voice. She spoke in short, deliberate phrases, almost like she'd rehearsed them. Behind her was a bare cement wall and a cheap plastic clock, the kind sold in supermarkets back then. The time read 4:19. Morning or evening, no one could tell. "Whoever finds this," the woman said, "needs to listen. Please listen. My name is Claire Hennings. I was a child psychologist with the Northborough Mental Health Trust from 1984 until my suspension in 1992. I am not missing. I am hiding. What you're holding, the suitcase, belongs to a child named Leah Corwin. She was 8. She went missing from her home on November 9, 1994. But you won't find her on any register. Not anymore. They wiped her out." The video cut off there, just a static buzz and then a hard stop. No click, no fade to black. As if someone had physically yanked the tape from the recorder mid-sentence. When Grace checked the national database, there was no record of a Leah Corwin. No missing child reports from that time matched the name, age, or date. Yet the receipts in the suitcase were real, she had them verified. A toy store purchase dated November 8, 1994. A shoe repair stub from a shop that closed in 96. All of it traceable, all of it authentic. But no one remembered Leah. Not neighbors, not school records, not medical files. It was as if the girl had never existed. But the most disturbing find was buried at the bottom of the suitcase, an unmarked cassette tape, not VHS, but microcassette, like the kind used in old voice recorders. Mallory sent it to be digitized. The tape was warped from age, but one phrase stood out, repeated 3 times in a young girl's voice: "I wasn't born. I was remembered." At first, Grace thought this might be the work of a mentally ill woman, someone with delusions who'd gone underground, literally. But the more she dug, the more the story resisted that explanation. For starters, there was a Claire Hennings. She had indeed been a psychologist, and she had been suspended in 1992. But not for malpractice or ethical breaches. The records showed she had voluntarily taken leave, citing extreme exhaustion. Her address listed a flat in the Northborough district, which had since been razed. No forwarding address. No family. No obituary. Grace called in archivists, forensic analysts, and retired staff from the trust. One name came up from an old HR file: Dr. Howard Denning. A supervisor at the trust back in the late 80s. When tracked down, Denning was 91 and living in a care home in Essex. Grace went to see him in person. At first, Denning claimed he didn't recall Claire Hennings. Too many years, too many names. But when Grace showed him the still frame from the video, Claire's face lit by the camcorder's glare, Denning went pale. She wasn't supposed to leave, he said, voice cracking. They told us she was dead. In the fire. What fire? Grace asked. Denning looked her straight in the eye and said, there was no fire. But that's what we were told. Grace left Essex that night with more questions than answers. But she had one lead, an old referral record from 1989. A psychiatric intake for a child patient listed as LC aged 3, showing signs of pre-language episodic regression. The rest of the file had been redacted. The last note, scribbled in blue ink in the margin, simply read, if she forgets again, we won't know what's real anymore. Grace's hands trembled as she read it. Because in her own police files, dating back to the mid-90s, she found a single handwritten note she couldn't remember writing. It was tucked behind an unrelated case folder from November 1994. It simply said, find the column. Don't let them seal it again. She didn't write that. She was sure of it. But the handwriting was hers. And the ink had faded as if it had been written decades ago. Part 2. Part 2. Grace Mallory had been known for her methodical, grounded style of detective work. No leaps, no gut instincts. Just patterns, evidence, and process. But nothing about the red suitcase fit any of that. Still, she pressed forward, quietly. No media alerts. No interdepartmental chatter. She didn't want interference. Not yet. She returned to the redevelopment site the next day. The foreman, a local named Sean Welby, looked shaken. He wasn't new to odd finds, buried safes, forgotten gas lines, even human remains once, under a pub wall. But this was different. When we pulled the suitcase out, the cavity started to hum. Just for a second. Like some kind of low electrical buzz. Then it stopped. Thought maybe it was just the camcorder, but it gave us all a chill. No one wants to touch that thing now. Grace climbed down to the foundation level and examined the hollowed-out pillar again. It had been formed with a plastic mold, designed to be temporary, then filled with concrete. But in this one case, the core had never been solidified, just wrapped in insulation. Like someone had engineered it that way on purpose. To hide something long-term. She had forensics re-examine the suitcase and its contents. No blood, no organic matter. But when they tested the camcorder's battery, it was at 87%. That shouldn't have been possible. Even with perfect conditions, batteries degrade, especially early lithium ones from the 90s. There was no logical way it could still hold a charge after 30 years. That night, Grace took the camcorder home. She couldn't shake the image of Claire's face in the video, not panicked, not scared, just resigned. Like she knew this message would be opened by someone too late. Grace set the camcorder on her kitchen table and played the clip again. But this time, it didn't stop after Claire's whispered warning. It continued. The tape now ran longer, by 37 seconds. Claire's image flickered, distorted by what looked like interference. She blinked slowly, then leaned closer to the camera. I recorded this in pieces, she said. They won't all play at once. Memory works like that now. Things disappear until they're needed. If you're watching this part, it means you've seen the girl's name. Leah. Don't speak it aloud again. Please. It draws her back. Then, static. When Grace rewound and played the clip again, it stopped at the original cutoff. No extra footage. Like the message could only be viewed once. It was almost 1 a.m. when Grace pulled an old notebook from her closet. A personal one she hadn't used in decades. It was filled with mundane notes, grocery lists, addresses. But near the back, written in faded pencil, were the words, "You never had a niece." Ask Denning about the room with no door. She stared at the phrase. Her chest tightened. Because in 1994, she had indeed taken a week's leave after a reported family emergency involving her niece, a niece she now couldn't find any photos of. No birthday cards, no hospital visits. Just a record of her own leave request and a vague memory of sadness. She called Denning again. He didn't answer. By morning, He was dead, natural causes, according to staff. No autopsy was ordered. Grace pushed for one anyway, but her request was met with silence. Then came the call. A woman named Harriet Rose rang from a hospice centre in Dorset. She'd seen the news about the redevelopment site. A local paper had leaked a photo of the cracked column and suitcase. Harriet said she had something. Not proof. But memory. Or what was left of it. She claimed to be Claire Henning's sister. "I haven't spoken to Claire since November of '94, she said. She just vanished. She left a voicemail the night before she disappeared, said she was staying at the old trust facility in Northborough, the one they closed in the '80s. Said she found something. Something that couldn't be forgotten." Grace drove down the next day. Harriet was in her 60s now. Thin, tired, but sharp. She handed Grace a worn envelope, no address, just her name written in block letters, Harriet. Inside was a single Polaroid. A blurry image of a child sitting on a cot in what looked like a concrete room. No windows, no door. Just bare walls and a mattress. The child's face was turned away, but she was holding a doll. The name stitched into the fabric was Leah. Harriet looked up at Grace with tears in her eyes. "My sister mailed me that photo the day she disappeared. Postmarked from Ashwood." Grace looked at the back of the photo. In faded marker was a sentence, almost childish in tone, "She forgets you when you blink." Grace thanked Harriet and left, heart pounding. She drove straight to Northborough, to the abandoned facility, a monolithic brick building that had been shuttered since 1988. The front entrance was chained, but she found a side access point, rusted shut but loose enough to force open. Inside, the building smelled of rot and mold. Patient charts lay scattered across the floor, some water-damaged beyond recognition. But near the far end of the corridor, Grace found a door marked Lower Observation. It led to a stairwell. She followed it down 2 levels until she found a corridor that didn't appear on any blueprint she'd reviewed. No numbers. Just doors. All welded shut. Except one. At the far end, a door stood slightly ajar. She opened it. Inside was a small, empty room. Concrete floor. Cement walls. No window, no exit besides the one she entered through. But in the center of the room was a child's drawing, freshly taped to the wall. It showed 2 stick figures. One was taller, with a gray circle for a head. The other was smaller, drawn in red crayon, eyes hollow, no mouth. Below it, scrawled in a child's handwriting, "She said I could come back when the suitcase opens." Grace stepped backward slowly. Then she noticed the sound. A faint hum, electric, low, and growing stronger. From her coat pocket, the camcorder flickered on. By itself. Part 3. The camcorder's flickering screen cast a faint light across the concrete walls, humming louder than seemed possible for such a small device. Grace stared at it in her hand. She hadn't touched the power button. The tape had been ejected the night before. It shouldn't even be playing. But it was. Claire's voice came through, distant this time, like it was being broadcast from another room. She remembers places, not people. That's how she holds on. If you're hearing this, Grace, you've opened the room. You've activated it. You need to leave. The screen glitched, thick bands of static tearing through Claire's face, but Grace caught the final frame before it went black, a silhouette standing behind Claire in the frame, just outside the light. Small. Still. Watching. Grace backed away from the center of the room and stepped into the hall. Her breath caught. The other doors, the welded ones, were now slightly ajar. Each one creaked on its hinges as if moved by a slow, measured hand. And in each room, movement. Not fast. Not violent. But rhythmic, like someone rocking. She couldn't see clearly, the hallway lights were flickering, but she could hear the same sound from each open doorway, a child's voice repeating the same phrase, over and over. "I wasn't born. I was remembered." Grace fled the corridor. Up 2 levels. Out through the rusted side entrance into the cold, bright sting of morning air. She didn't stop to check her phone until she was back in her car, locked inside. 5 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. A voicemail had been left 20 minutes earlier. It was a child's voice. "You were her once. Then you forgot." They helped you forget. Click. That afternoon, Grace returned to her precinct and did what she hadn't dared until now. She pulled her own personnel file. It was a thick binder, heavily redacted in parts. Pages she remembered writing now bore unfamiliar edits. Incident reports from November 1994 had been amended to include notes she didn't recall approving. One entry in particular stood out: November 11th. Mallory assigned to investigate reports of missing minor from unregistered address in Ashwood. Subject's name withheld at request of MH Trust. But there was no corresponding case number. No location. Just a black line where the name should be. Her hands shook as she turned to the last page of the binder. Someone had slipped in a photo. Not an official document, a snapshot. A child, standing at the foot of a brick building. Pale, expressionless. Wearing a red raincoat. Grace knew that raincoat. She remembered buying it for a niece she now wasn't sure existed. The photo was dated November 9, 1994. The same day Leah Corwin disappeared. Grace took a breath. She had to know. She had to confirm if Leah had ever existed outside of Claire's message, or worse, if she'd existed only inside it. She called the Ashwood Planning Office and requested archival blueprints for the shopping plaza, specifically the parking deck and structural columns. An hour later, an engineer named Ewan Nash returned her call. "This is strange," he said. "We've got records for all 32 support columns except one, the one from your site photo. That column wasn't part of the original design. It was added during renovations in '94. Who authorized it?" Grace asked. "Here's the weirder part," Ewan replied. "It wasn't. The work order's unsigned. No engineer of record. Just a handwritten note in the margin, for her return." Grace didn't sleep that night. She laid out all the evidence in her flat, the receipts, the drawing, the camcorder, the photo of the child. She pinned the Polaroid to her wall and stared at it for hours. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. Then she noticed something she hadn't before. The drawing, the one she found in the room with no door, had new markings. Faint smudges at first, but unmistakable now. A third figure had been added beside the two stick figures. This one was taller than the others, with wide shoulders and a triangle skirt. A police badge drawn in crude black ink on the chest. Someone had drawn her into the image. The door to her flat creaked. She froze. Then the humming returned, not from the camcorder this time, but from the walls themselves. A low vibration, like electricity running through unseen veins. She picked up the camcorder. The battery light blinked red now, 3% remaining. One last play. She pressed rewind. The tape whirred. Then clicked. Then played. Claire's voice came through again, clearer than ever. "She found me the day I remembered her name. I tried to forget. We all did. But the mind doesn't lose things, it buries them. And when enough people remember the same thing, it becomes real. Even if it never was." Then came the final sentence. Whispered. Barely audible. "She's going to need you next, Grace." The camcorder shut off. Permanently. Battery dead. No response. Grace looked back at the drawing on her wall. The stick figure of herself had a speech bubble now. It said, "Leah? Part 4. At dawn, Grace walked into the sea. Not far, just up to her knees, the cold surf biting at her skin like glass. She needed something physical, something real. Salt water, sky, the pulse of the tide, the only things she could trust now. She stared out at the horizon, waves crashing in patterns that didn't feel random anymore. She whispered the name. Leah. And the wind stopped. Not faded, stopped. As if the entire coastline held its breath. The waves froze in motion for half a heartbeat. Then resumed, but slower, more deliberate, like the rhythm had changed. That day, Grace called Harriet Rose again, desperate for anything tangible, photos, letters, journals, from Claire's life. Harriet hesitated, then admitted she'd hidden one final thing, a locked tin box Claire had mailed her in '94, with a warning never to open it. Harriet had kept it sealed, buried in a closet under quilts and old coats. Until now. Grace drove to Dorset that night. They opened the box together. Inside were 24 cassette tapes, each labeled with a date between August and November of 1994. Each was wrapped in paper with a single sentence written on it: instructions, warnings, riddles. One read, "Don't listen in a hospital." Another said, "Only play this in a room with no mirrors." But the last tape was different. It wasn't labeled by date. It simply read, "For her." Grace played it. It began with a child humming. A slow, looping melody, no lyrics, just breathy tones like a lullaby from a half-remembered dream. Then Claire's voice, close to the mic, almost trembling. "She changes when she's remembered. Memory gives her shape. That's why she targets people who forget, the grieving, the sick, the displaced. She finds the edges of what we lose, and then she lives in them." Leah was never born, but she was seen. Then silence. Followed by something new, a different voice. Grace's own voice. "I saw her. On the stairs. I was holding the report. She looked at me and said, 'Don't blink.' Then she wasn't there." Grace froze. That memory, vague, ghost-like, existed somewhere deep inside her. A childhood staircase. A report falling from her hand. But no one had recorded her saying that. Not until now. Harriet was crying softly in the corner. "She made you forget," she whispered. That's what Claire meant. She didn't hide Leah, she trapped her in memory. In you. Grace barely slept that night. The next morning, she returned to Ashwood. She needed answers from someone who'd been there. Someone who hadn't forgotten yet. And she found him, though barely. Walter Pierce, former custodian at the Northborough facility in the 80s, was still alive. 94 years old, lucid only on rare days, but his son agreed to let Grace visit. When she showed Walter the photo of the column, he blinked slowly. "That's where the noise was," he murmured. "Back in '89. Every night around 4, humming under the floor. Like a wire singing. But they told us not to talk about it." Grace leaned in. "Do you remember Leah?" Walter's hands twitched. His eyes lost focus. Then he whispered, "She was never there. But she was always in the mirror." What mirror? They had to remove them. Patients kept saying she watched through reflections. Wouldn't sleep. One boy clawed his own eyes out. Said she wanted to be born through him. Grace pressed her hand against her chest, trying to steady her pulse. She remembered now, vaguely, an old mirror in her childhood home, covered with a blanket after an accident. No one ever explained what had happened. But she remembered being terrified of it. She left Walter and drove straight to her childhood home, now occupied by tenants. She lied, said she was researching the original architecture, and convinced the young couple to let her look inside. The house had changed, but one thing hadn't. The hallway outside the second-floor bedroom still held a full-length wall frame, now replaced with a coat rack. Grace reached behind it, her fingers brushing smooth wood. There had been a mirror there once. Back in her car, she reviewed the drawing again, the one with her stick figure newly added. Only now, another figure had been scribbled beside her. Smaller, eyes hollow, hand outstretched. And in her own voice, she suddenly remembered something else, not from evidence, but from inside her, a lullaby. The same one from the tape. She hadn't heard it in 30 years. She used to sing it. To someone. Grace drove straight to her flat. Tore open her storage trunk. Dug through old boxes until she found a doll, one she didn't recognize but had apparently kept. Faded blue dress. Stitched name on the hem, Leah. She sat on the floor and stared at it for hours. Until the humming started again. Only this time, it wasn't from the camcorder or the walls. It came from inside the doll. Part 5. The doll vibrated softly in Grace's palm, its hum like a tiny mechanical heart. She didn't want to move. Didn't want to breathe. Her flat was silent, no traffic outside, no ticking clock. Time felt suspended, as though the walls themselves were waiting for her to act. She turned the doll over slowly. There was no battery compartment. No stitching out of place. No electronics at all. And yet the hum deepened when she held it to her chest, as though responding to her pulse. She whispered the name. Leah. The sound stopped. The lights flickered. Then, The voice came again, not through tape or camcorder or phone. From the air itself, thin and close, like a breath behind her ear. "You kept me. All this time." Grace turned sharply. Nothing. But the mirror above her fireplace, a cheap antique she barely remembered buying, was fogged with condensation. On the glass, written in the moisture, were 4 words. "It was you first." Grace stepped back, heart pounding. The memories, fragmented, denied for decades, returned in a single wave. A storm of images, voices, and fractured thoughts. The case from '94. The little girl. No parents. No history. No missing person report. Just appeared in a bus station, silent, eyes fixed on the CCTV camera. Grace had been first on scene. She remembered holding the child's hand. Taking her home just for the night while the department scrambled for a placement. But the child never spoke. Never slept. She'd just stare. And hum. For weeks, Grace had looked after her, convinced the girl was traumatized, unrecorded, maybe the victim of some cult or trafficking ring. But as she dug deeper, the trail blurred. People she contacted forgot the child's name days later. Even she had to keep it written down on her hand. Leah. Then, one day, the girl vanished. No signs of forced entry. No packed bag. Just gone. Her supervisors told her it never happened. No record of a girl. No notes in the system. Grace had a breakdown. Medical leave. Psychiatric evaluation. She'd buried it all. Or something had buried it for her. Now, standing in her flat, holding the doll, she knew, she had been the first witness. The one who named her. Who gave shape to something that wasn't supposed to exist. And that had made it real. The camcorder beeped once. Just once. Battery dead. But the tape inside had ejected itself. Grace pulled it free and held it to the light. Someone, not her, had scratched a sentence into the black plastic with a pin. "You remember her. That's enough." She barely felt her legs as she walked toward the mirror. The condensation had faded, but something stirred just beneath the glass, not a reflection, but a shape, moving independently of her own. A figure, small and still, its hand pressed to the glass. Grace reached forward. The surface was warm. And then, a blink. The room was empty. No doll. No camcorder. No mirror. Only Grace, standing alone in a silent flat. She opened her coat pocket. Inside was a receipt. Dated November 8, 1994. A toy store purchase. 1 doll, blue dress. And a name scrawled at the bottom, Leah. Her own handwriting. That night, she returned to the pillar at the Ashwood redevelopment site. No one was there. Construction had halted indefinitely. She climbed into the pit one last time. And left the doll inside. Wrapped it in plastic. Zipped it into the red suitcase. And sealed it back into the cavity. By morning, the column had been repoured. No one asked why. No one remembered why. Grace retired quietly a week later. She never spoke of it again. But years later, after she'd moved south, a child disappeared from a foster home in Dorset. No record. No trace. Only a drawing left behind on the wall. 2 stick figures. One was a little girl. The other wore a badge. And above their heads, in red crayon. She said I could come back. She remembered me. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to Unconfirmed, a new story drops daily.